In this video, I'm going to show you how I built this lounge chair. So this is the drawing I used to cut out pieces, and I used those pieces as templates. The project requires about 24 board feet of lumber. I'm going to be using cherry. As you can see, these boards have some imperfections, and I'll just have to avoid them. I'll start by cutting the boards down to manageable lengths. And now the milling process will begin. Typically, I like to make the faces coplanar before moving on to cleaning up the edges. Some people like to do a face and an edge while they're standing at the joiner. But I'll typically jump between the joiner and the planer, making the faces coplanar. I'll clean up the edges with a few passes at the joiner and then cut them to width at the table saw. Now the table saw leaves some marks, so I'll use a hand plane to just smooth the edges, get rid of all those saw marks. Here I'm squaring up one end of the boards before cutting them to length. I set up a stop block so that all of the slat pieces for the chair end up the same size. It's important that the stop block does not proceed to be right next to the blade, otherwise your piece will get caught and cause a kickback. So it has to be short. And at the router table, I take a few passes to add a tongue or tenon to all the slat ends. Before finishing the tongue, I use a marking knife to score the ends to hopefully reduce tear out. And then I added the groove or dado to the rails. This makes a nice slip fit. And now onto assembly. I really like having this accurate grid of holes on my table. It makes squaring up pieces very easy. And with plenty of glue, I line up our first piece. From there, I can use offcuts to space out the slats consistently. In this design, the bottom and the back of the chair are identical. So for the back of the chair, I just followed this same process. And it's actually starting to look like a chair. So I did decide to sand the pieces now and put them aside as I finish the rest of the assembly for the legs and the arms. I used 120 grit and then 180 grit. I laid out the templates that are used for the arm and leg assemblies. And here's how the pieces will be arranged. Now I'm going to mill up some boards to 1 inch. Same process as before. And yes, I like to use an incredibly long push stick. The further I could be away from the table saw, the better. Now I need to trace my templates, and I used some masking tape here, and I was careful to really smooth out the paper templates so that there aren't any bubbles that would create inconsistencies. It's really important that these lay completely flat. I spent about an hour at the bandsaw cutting the pieces out. I left about 1/16 and then sanded all of that down later. And this was an idea I had on the fly. If I run the saw blade through both pieces at the same time, then they will create a perfect joint. Now I did run a rabbet down the edge of these pieces, and unfortunately I lost the footage at the router table. You can see here I was adjusting the height for that rabbet, and here's what the rabbet looks like. Now I am a big fan of the dowel max. I really like dowel joinery. It's easy to learn, it's inexpensive, and this jig from a Canadian company is very, very good. Now with plenty of glue and some clamping fixtures double-sided taped to these pieces, I'm able to clamp the joint together despite its odd shape. Now I did assemble the arm and leg pieces together in the same fashion. They did end up taking some persuasion to get together, and that actually caused a big mistake, which I'll go over later on. What I should have done is drilled the holes out a bit more so that these pieces fit together easily instead of me hammering them together. And with the dowel max and the pin that comes with the kit, I'm making a series of holes to accept dowels to put together the back and the bottom. Here I just add a little round over at the disc sander so that the dowels slip in easier. Try to use plenty of glue. Plenty of glue. These frames took a little bit of hand hammering to get in place. That tells me it's a good fit. I noticed this crack. This is the mistake that I had mentioned before on the leg assembly. And I decided I was going to add a key to this crack, kind of like how a bow tie works on a tabletop. With plenty of glue, this key should hold it together. Luckily, this is on the underside of the chair. And moving on, I added a slight chamfer to all of the edges. I then proceeded with all of my sanding with 120 and then again with 180. But I won't bore you with sanding footage. Now, I marked where the chair assembly will fit to the arm/leg assemblies because I needed to add a cross member or stringer to the front of the chair to both add stability and give the front profile a more substantial look. I use the Forstner bit as a counter bore and the two brad point bits to bore the holes to accept the rather beefy screws I had on hand. I also use this little countersink to allow the screws to sit properly in the hole. And by boring this out, I'm able to add plugs later. I glued and assembled the pieces together with screws. Made sure to wax the screws so they go in without breaking. And then I cut plugs at the drill press. Here I was careful to line up the grain of the plugs to match the grain direction of the legs. I moved on to cutting the arms of the chair from 1-inch stock. I added a slight bevel to match the back of the chair, and then I had to create a relief in these arms where they meet the back of the chair, and this notch is angled, so I decided to cut them by hand, though I could have figured it out the table saw with a miter gauge and some careful planning. I use some dowels to align the arms so that they match perfectly on each side. And then I flush cut the plugs at each leg. This is what the holes look like after sanding. Now for finish, I'm using Rubio Monocoat. I always try to be careful with mixing Rubio, though I have heard there is some room for error. I applied 2 coats over a weekend, allowing 36 hours between coats. I really enjoyed designing and building this chair, and if you enjoyed watching the process, please consider liking the video and subscribing to my channel. Hoping to release more content in the future. Thank you.